This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
Have you seen the Amazon Prime docuseries, Shiny Happy People? Were you shocked to hear the wholesome American Duggar family was involved in a cult?
A cult full of abuse, sex, and religious trauma. A cult that claimed to educate children and planned to use them to take over the world. Have you wished you could sit down with an IBLP survivor and hear more of the story?
Join hosts Jessica Goforth and Alexis Gray on Leaving the Village, a podcast by IBLP survivors centering their lived experiences and shining a light on all the hidden torment and harm they endured growing up in the cult shown on the groundbreaking docuseries.
We have exclusive interviews with cast members where we laugh and cry and go behind the scenes with them as we discuss our shared experiences.
If watching the documentary left you wanting more, check out Leaving the Village on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on your favorite podcast platform.
You're trying to sell this as you are Mr. Contrite and I'm sorry and whatever. So what does it harm you to say, I thought it was consensual. I realize now that the power dynamics were off. I didn't mean to be abusive, but it was. And things like this should not happen. But you can't say that. Number one, because you're gonna do it again and you want to leave that door open for it to be okay. Number two, you know people who have done it, are doing it right now, and will continue to do it, who you want to work with, who you want to stay in ministry circles with, and you cannot compromise that. That's the biggest disappointment to me, I think, with this whole thing. This was supposed to be this survivor narrative, and even if you didn't want to personally attack Carl Lentz, you didn't even make him interrogate the system. You didn't, because the follow-up question, well, if the power dynamics are off, how is that not abuse? Isn't that abusive? Shouldn't that not happen? But he can't do that because he needs this world and he has to go back into it and they don't want to change it. Pre-roll.
Pre-roll.
Go.
30 seconds. And you know when that thing drops.
The band better be on stage.
Yep. Otherwise it was my head.
You didn't set us up for a win, Nate.
No, I didn't.
Oh, man.
All right. So, hey, Janice, welcome back. Here we go again.
Oh,
There we
it's
go
always
again.
something with you guys. Always something.
You know what, though, Janice?
Jeez.
The best, the best is yet to come.
There is more.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I don't know if you all who listen to this podcast pay any attention to the world of evangelical news, but if you don't, a documentary has come out about one of the cults that I was in.
How does it feel, guys, when they make a documentary on your specific cult, your specific church, and your specific city? Like, exactly you guys.
Yeah.
Living the dream, basically.
Oh, yeah. It's fantastic.
That's why you went there. You're like, further down the line, if I join this church, I'm going to get 5 minutes of fame on a documentary about how terrible that experience was.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. I actually, Gail, I'm glad you brought that up, specifically the city, because there have been not one, but two full docu-series, not to mention a whole bunch of, like, there's a BBC miniseries, there's at
so many.
least 2 or 3 60 Minutes exposés in Australia. I think Nightline or Show, whatever Australian, they have some kind of special show. Recently did something last month or a month or two ago. But this new one that came out, that's on Hulu, it also aired on FX. This one was specifically about our location Predominantly.
Yeah.
Predominantly,
A lot
yeah.
of the other documentaries maybe highlighted a bit of New York here or there, but they weren't focused on New York as the main topic. Whereas this one seemed, it did like the other ones. It covered, but it almost did in reverse. It covered a bit of the general Hillsong before going back into how and they were using it from the perspective of how the general big global Hillsong ties into New York City. Whereas the other ones was more like New York City was a little branch off here. Let's take a side path from the general Hillsong. Sort of like the opposite. Really, you guys were the focus in New York City on this one.
Big stars.
I did think that the Discovery Plus one, I thought it was a well done documentary, but it was interesting that even while that documentary got to the end, there was still breaking news that they had to probably add in at the last second on the end credits because I think Brian had just resigned as it released. And then I think how much stuff has happened. I don't know if that was just over a year ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think of like how much has gone down since. And I think it's easy to make a new Hillsong documentary every year because they just keep doing more and more things. So there's always new material to work with. But I think my biggest disgruntlement with the one that was from Discovery Plus, which 3 hours long, did a good job. I think covered a lot of important stuff, things I never heard or knew about Hillsong as an outsider to it, obviously. You guys probably are much more aware, but I thought it did a good job for those who are unfamiliar with it to give you like an in-depth view of it. My biggest one was I know some of your stories. I know your story, Janice. I knew Noemi's story. And then seeing how little of the important topics, like actually basically nothing when it came to homosexuality, when it came to Black people in church, any people of color at Hillsong, like they just skipped over entirely. Like Discovery Plus didn't touch it. And I get why. Makes sense to me why any documentary wouldn't want to touch it. It's always harder to do those topics because a lot of it is much more subtle and people could easily be like, well, that's your opinion, so the other stuff is just are dropping facts. It's easier to prove. These topics, it gets murky. And I was so glad, I'll give my positive, that in the new one, you guys, that you were in, Janice, I was glad that they touched on those two topics. Like that was missing from the other one, and why I was upset. That was like my biggest complaint from the other one was why would you bring Janice in? Why would you bring Noemi in and not touch on any of the stuff, like the main things that were going down? So I thought this one, at least in that category, they started down that path and they said a few things, and you guys had more of a chance. Noemi wasn't in this one, but Josh Canfield was giving his story. I hope I'm saying his name right, from New York and what happened with him. And I think thought,
partially because it was very New York focused and Noemi was exclusively Boston.
Right.
Well, and also Noemi was...
Noemi had signed an exclusivity with Discovery.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think I want to start with, that was my first question I want to ask both of you, because I was giving what I liked. What do you guys think they did a good job? We'll start with a good. There's probably a lot more to say on the other end, and I'm sure we'll go there. But what did you guys think was good about, like, what did you like about it?
For me, I would say the third episode was really strong. So they're delving into the history of Frank Houston and the beginning of, Hillsong proper. I thought that was well done.
So when they weren't focused on New York, they did a good job.
Yeah, I would agree. I thought it was probably, out of everything that's been shown so far, that at least that I've watched, this one did the best job of showing how insidious the roots were and kind of made it pretty clear that the history of Hillsong and how it was founded has sort of been obfuscated by Brian Houston, right? Like, in the question constantly comes up, well, who founded Hillsong? Was it Brian or was it Frank? And the reply is often, maybe both. Yes. And so I think, Brian has done a lot of work over the years to hide his father's influence in the founding of the church and make it seem like he was the founder, because you wouldn't want a church founded by a pedophile now, would you? So I think that third episode, I agree. That third episode did a good job of kind of showing that. So I guess that's what where I would go with that.
How did you feel about that specific part, Janice? Like, I know they gave you some chance to give voice, and every time you were saying something, I'm like, yes, let her speak. And I'm always wondering what was cut, because everyone gets cut a lot, right? You do lots and lots of interview, and you don't know what's gonna end up being the stuff that they keep. But the stuff that you did say, I really thought it was hard hitting. I thought some of the stuff Tanya said was very hard hitting, even though it was in Hillsong, New York. I thought Josh Canfield stuff, like I thought the interviews talking on these topics, the people, when it wasn't Carl Lentz, I thought you guys did a phenomenal job with what you were saying. How did you feel about what you remember? Do you have a recollection of what you said versus what was pulled out, or were you surprised by what was kept?
I think, I mean, my story and my opinion is what it is. So it's not like I'm like, what did I say? What did I say for this one? It's like, no, this is what I say. This is my shtick. So, I think I was, well, leading up to it, like it's hard to parse out how I feel about any of it now, because there's just too many threads and too many rethinking too many things and trying to, what were they thinking and why did they do it this way? So like before it came out, right? Like we were told this is going to be this, we're trying to understand the undertow of evangelicalism and we want this to be more about the survivors and these survivor narratives. So okay, so that's what we're going into it with. So, we recorded this a year ago. And then, you go on with life and it's coming out eventually, but it's not really sometime in the spring, I guess. But life goes on. You're not really thinking about it. And then the press release came out. And then that's when I found out Carl and Laura are part of this. And immediately my first reaction, like my evangelical brain just kicked in. And I'm like, I do not want to be part of their redemption arc. Because that was just my first.
That was my first thought too.
That's like my first thought. And then I was like, no, calm down. Like that's the evangelical in you, just knowing that that's what evangelicals are going to be looking for. And that's what, they're going to be hyped for. But for me, I was like, but this is these secular people, these secular companies, they have no reason to redeem Carl Lentz. Like, he's not useful to that world. This was supposed to be for survivors. So I'm trusting it's going to be fine. So I just need to, whatever. And then, the way they split it up. So it's the first 2 episodes and then a week and then the last 2. So the first 2 episodes, I was like, well, I was braced for something worse. But even when it was over, like, it was still like, it wasn't like, oh, this was wonderful. It was still like, there's something about this that is still a wait and see. Like, I can't, I don't, and it's, I felt like, okay. And like, honestly, at this point, I'm like, it feels like it was 2 different teams working, like and somebody did the first half and then a Hillsong intern did the last one. Like, and they're
seriously,
they're trying to get on staff and that this was their, project. So after the first 2, I was like, well, in some ways, like and now, like, I'm second guessing everything. I'm like, did they think he looked better than he did? So like, they set up all these things where like, oh, he cries on cue and he's very charming and and then he comes on and that's the first thing he does. Right. And it's like, oh, are they
trying to out how manipulative he is? Are they trying to show the audience how he goes about things and like pull back the curtain for people? I thought that was so interesting. What you just said. And a few people had messaged me about it and they were like, no, he doesn't look good. It opens with them saying how he cries on cue. And then his first scene, he does the cry on cue right after someone was interviewed expressing that. And they're like, so they're sort of highlighting the problems with Carl Lentz. And I think from the first 2, I don't know that there was a whole lot where I was like, okay, they're defending Carl Lentz. I thought, I guess I had some issues with some of the stuff Carl was saying, but I like that they kept flashing to people responding with, their own stories and kind of like pushing back on Carl's narrative. It looked like they were giving, and I think that could have been done that way. They could have used Carl that way to like have him say something and then have the clip of the congregation member explaining how things work. But Like I also felt it was a little ambiguous. I wasn't.
Yeah. It felt that way. Like in retrospect now, I feel like it might not have had that kind of purposeful attention, and more just like, hey, this is a cool juxtaposition that we can, cut between Carl and Tiff talking about their college experience. But I like after the first 2 episodes dropped, when I looked at it, then I was thinking, wow, that's fascinating. Maybe I gave them a little bit more credit, because I was thinking,
you're thankful. You thanked the director.
Yeah, this is a challenge to Carl's narrative. If you keep cutting Tiff's perspective, like it, especially since they had touched on racism, they had touched on LGBTQ issues at the church. So maybe there was something to this whole juxtaposing and cutting between Carl and Tiff. Maybe it was like, here's the white man bloviating about whatever it is that he went through. Now here is a minority, a woman who has been abused in the church. Here's her story. Back and forth, back and forth. So that's what I thought they were kind of doing. I don't know. Now I'm almost like, I don't know if that contrast was on purpose, or if they just were like, yeah, this is a cool little back and forth juxtaposing about 2 people talking about their experience at Hillsong College.
Or if it was different teams working on each piece.
Yeah, right.
Because it did feel disjointed to some extent.
It did. And I won't like throw any names or anything out there, but I did feel a very different kind of energy from my conversations with the producer who had initially reached out, and the follow-ups after that producer left the production, and then the follow-ups that I received. Really, it was more just, I felt like damage control after that press release went out. And then I was surprised to find out that producer was no longer there.
I think maybe we should just clarify. You were a part of the interviews, Nate. For those who didn't know, or people who are, not understanding why you're talking to the producer.
right.
You were a part of the group of people that got together. We were there with Janice, with Tiffany. You guys were, I stopped by for emotional support and was curious what was going on. But like, and the Reclamation Collective was there, Kayla, and I forget her Kendra. They were there, and like you said, Janice, the topic was spiritual abuse, and that's what it looked like from the onset of what was going down, and how this looked different than the other documentaries. That seemed to be what was presented, and all of that is like, there's no Reclamation Collective, there's no therapists talking about spiritual abuse. It's gone. That whole narrative was just, and Nate was cut. How do you feel, Nate, about being cut for Carl Lentz? I mean, it's got
it seems like it just seems very familiar.
You're like, yep, this sounds like a good summary of Hillsong right here.
I was there to pave the way.
But I think that highlights something about, anyway, something I find upsetting is just the whole, you're bumping out people's stories who were the victims in order to make space for Carl Lentz. Like, and they started off the documentary saying, for some of the people who are in this documentary, they might be disturbed to find out Carl Lentz is in it. And like, they acknowledged, like, straight up that they pulled something last second that, like, you guys didn't sign on to that. You didn't agree to that. That wasn't how it was wasn't presented to you that way. So anything else good? Can we think of any other positives before we get into what went wrong?
I liked the editing style.
It had the high production value.
The trailer was amazing.
Yeah, that was a good trailer. The intro, the song that they chose for the intro, the artwork, I guess, for lack of a better term, the B-roll that they put in there, along with, like,
you made it with your B-roll, Nate. I saw you worshiping.
Oh, well, yeah.
I'm just bugging you.
That's why you like it. That's why you like it, Nate.
That's why I like it. Yeah.
He wasn't in the intro.
No, I wasn't in the intro. The church kids walking by with, like, the 8-bit style sunglasses and the Instagram hearts and likes and comments rolling over. I thought that was a cool intro. And again, I feel like I'm comparing and contrasting the one on Max. Sorry, that's a whole.
Oh yeah, it was Discovery Plus. Now it's
HBO
Max.
Max, formerly HBO Max, now Max. The what was the Discovery Plus documentary. I felt like the Discovery Plus documentary sort of half-assed the intro. It was just sort of like this eerie music and then the title card. This one had some interesting messaging in the intro. So that I'll give them that. I thought that was cool. But yeah. So
I'm trying to think of what other pieces I like besides all the people that I know and love who did great points. There's somebody I didn't know who was talking about spiritual abuse, and I thought I was upset Reclamation was cut because it would have been so interesting knowing the direction they started in to see how that could have gone with those conversations, specifically narrowing in on spiritual abuse. But there was somebody they had included. I don't even remember who. I didn't recognize them. Talking about a lamb and spiritual abuse and breaking the lamb's legs, and they were kind of contrasting that to bad pastoring, and they were using it as a metaphor with how Hillsong was going. Do you remember that little bit?
No,
somewhere
because
in one of the first two.
What was Carl preaching a message about? How Jesus breaks the lamb's, or the shepherd breaks the lamb's legs. Somebody was preaching a message.
Maybe it was Brian. I don't know.
And then somebody, they got on one of the talking heads to kind of talk about how that is the type of sermon illustration that perpetuates abuse in the church. I thought that, yeah, you're right. That was good.
I mean, it was a very small clip, but I'm like, okay, so they kind of brought in the topic of spiritual abuse and sort of how pastors can shape a sermon to kind of indirectly communicate they're the boss. And if you don't fall in line, break your legs. I don't even know how else to put that. But it was a very graphic, violent kind of metaphor being used to show like the sheep being treated in a way that's not loving, tender, cared for, but abusive, basically an abusive shepherd, and how that would play out. And tying
better
it
get
into,
on the bus
or get run over by the bus. That was Mark Driscoll, and Mark Driscoll was he was platformed by Hillsong when he ran away from his church. They were going to have him live at important detail. They were going to have him live at conference. People protested, and then they just put him on video. No reason to, but it does. So somebody in some comments somewhere I was reading was like, oh, Hillsong is just a niche part of evangelicalism. It doesn't represent. And I'm like, these mega churches, and there's like 4 that cover almost all the top worship music. It's like Elevation, Hillsong, Bethel, and I think the 4th was like Passion. And like, if you go through the last 10 years, those 4 dominate all of them. And Hillsong is the top one of those 4 in terms of the music that's played everywhere. And it's interesting that like Mark Driscoll, Hillsong, why would there be any connection at all? Not the same, not like this is neo-reform camp, this is charismatic. Like you wouldn't assume. But like it seems like these networks are much more networked than the people in the churches even realize, these big names, and how they know each other, how they support each other, how they like. I'm not surprised that Carl Lentz has found a new job in another church already. Like these people know each other, and the big names support each other. Like there was no reason to support Mark Driscoll. He had just literally collapsed his church and was running away. And yet they gave him a platform, which told me something about Hillsong. Like these are not even their crew. It's not their camp they run with. It's not their network of people. And yet, yeah, sorry. When you mentioned Mark Driscoll, that popped in my head. There's stuff that you see like looking back, right? Like all the stuff that's come forward since had not happened yet. Hillsong did not have the reputation it has now. But when you see them platforming somebody so corrupt who has harmed so many people and is running away and not taking accountability, in hindsight now you look at that and it's like, oh, of course. That makes complete sense.
Gail, you had mentioned something you saw someone write. It was a comment on a post. I don't even remember where the post was.
You sent it to me, I think.
I'll go ahead and read this comment. I think it was in one of those like ex-evangelical groups on Facebook. And somebody had posted, everyone needs to go watch this documentary series right now, and so on and so forth. And this person had commented and said, yes, it was awful, but I was pleased to see a contrite and changed Carl in episode 4. And props to Laura for sticking it through. A lot of people in this documentary are friends and acquaintances of mine, and it personally grieved me. What the church did to my friend Jeff was unforgivable. I will still use Hillsong music in public worship.
Of course. Not
Some of it is
surprised by
just
me.
special.
Special.
The
Yeah.
sins of the founders don't necessarily extend to the musicians and the writers. I feel like we should address this too. Remember, Hillsong occupies a very niche space in evangelicalism.
Yeah,
And not
those-
all evangelical churches are in it for the money, power, or prestige. Some are truly reaching others with good news through good deeds and good conversation.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. These churches, there's some good ones, right? You got Hillsong popping up. Mark just, there's just so much in that comment that's aggravating. And Laura, good for her. Props to her for standing by. What? Like, I remember when Hillary stood by Bill Clinton, I was like, oh, that was it for me. I was like, I wanted to cheer her on, but I'm like, nope, sorry. Like, your guy abused people and you stand by your man. There's just a piece of me that just doesn't. Like, I don't understand why people cheer that on. It really, to me, sounds like you idolize marriage so much that it doesn't matter if the women in it are ignored and harmed or anything, or if it's super unhealthy and toxic. And yeah, I don't get. But then it makes sense that that'd be the same person saying, I'm still going to use Hillsong music because it's special. And I've heard that from a lot of evangelicals, that they're just because no matter how many things they find out about Hillsong, they're not going to depart from paying licenses to Hillsong and using their, and I'm like, this is why you talk about how there are good pockets in evangelicalism. How can there be when you're assuming you're on that good side and you're okay with continuing to funnel money into organizations you acknowledge have big problems? Like, how?
I did respond to his comment. I don't know if I can find it. But essentially kind of, pointing out the problems in his comment. And then he went on a long, I mean, I didn't even bother reading most of it. It was all sorts of word salad, but he did end up making it kind of about himself and the pain that he suffered and so on and so forth. And then he kind of ended with, we shouldn't be tarring
the image of Jesus, the name of God.
the musicians and the writers of these songs, just because the founder of the church did something bad. And I'm like, it comes down to the same argument when people are just like, oh, cancel culture. And I'm like, no, we're just saying, can they not be working in a position? Can they not get money for doing this thing that we're bothered by? And I'm not going to give them money to continue doing the thing that is harmful. Like, that's what this is about, essentially. Like, and at the end of the day, also, the people that were making the money off of those songs were not the people who had, put a ton of effort into writing those songs. Those lyrics and those songs were stolen by the ones who got the writing credits. So anyway,
I don't think people are often aware of the details of the musicians when they're talking about them. They like to imagine like these people that are, and they're, because I don't think they realize how much free labor is behind Hillsong and how the people are getting ripped off who are actually the good ones in the stuff. The ones who are happy to not be paid because they really care about doing the right thing. How much exploitation is going on. Oh man, I feel like you went in so many directions, Nate. You mentioned cancel culture. I felt like that was in the documentary. I took notes. Where was that? Brian Houston, cancel culture will write you off, but God won't.
Oh.
I love when corrupt people go cancel culture on it. Like, how many people has Brian canceled throughout his, but as soon as it's them, then it's, I mean, Trump was like so good at always cancel culture, and he's always like talking about who they need to get rid of. Like, it's just, it's so funny how common that is with people who are villainous and who are very power hungry and who cancel other people all the time, that they quickly use that, and it works somehow. Like, they know that this somehow tugs at people's hearts. Oh no, we know we shouldn't cancel people. Yeah. it's like a red flag when I hear someone ranting about cancel culture. I'm like, oh, that tells me something.
Yep. So what didn't we like about this?
Okay, I had a question specifically related to that comment where they brought up, about Carl and how they saw his redemption. And I thought about how, you mentioned episode 3, Janice, and how they did a good job with it. So they really did highlight in 3 how messed up Brian is. And I think they might have done it in some of the other episodes, but really like they touched on how power hungry Brian is. They touched on how he led with an iron fist, the people he's run over, like kind of really went into detail highlighting Brian. Brian does not come off looking good at all in this documentary. Nowhere, no how. But then you have Carl, and he kind of, and I've seen other people write this, that he's like a victim of Hillsong culture. And, Carl looks different than Brian. He looks like the guy who, was harmed through it, but like the victim, and Brian looks like the bad guy. And I think a lot of people come away watching that and think, okay, so Carl, we should feel sorry for the stuff he's been through. It's been hard on him, and Brian was the problem. You guys are much more familiar, Janice and Nate, with Carl. You guys are much more familiar with New York. They gave Carl a lot of time to talk and to paint himself how he wanted. But for people who are outsiders or who were not at Hillsong New York, how would you describe the differences between a Carl Lentz and a Brian Houston? For people who just saw the documentary, like, hey, Brian's the bad guy, Carl is nice, misguided, stumbled through. So what have you guys seen from Carl? How would you paint him? How would you describe Carl Lentz?
The differences between Carl and Brian are that Carl is younger and Carl is more charismatic.
I would say, because and of course I wasn't super familiar with, it's not like Brian Houston was around. From my perspective of sort of observing a lot of this, I would say that Carl had this unique ability to make himself seem approachable. Brian, to me, strikes me as more of, he
Clumsy?
doesn't care. He may be a little clumsier, yeah, but he doesn't care.
He doesn't seem to think through how he goes about things in the way Carl does. It seems like he just kind of blunders his way through things. And
well, I think it's also a generational thing. Like, it's like, okay, boomer, like yeah. Brian was not for us. Like, he wasn't. No one wanted to be close to Brian. Like I'm thinking about it now, and I was just in a different position anyway. So I saw Brian backstage and whatever. So like for me, him and Carl were pretty like they moved and operate the same. That's why I'm like, no, Carl is younger and he's more charismatic. But like it wasn't like I was backstage with Brian and he was unfriendly or he was, unapproachable for me. Like it's like, yeah, okay, when Brian comes, he has his special handkerchiefs and he needs his water and I'm dealing with his body man or whatever. But like, yeah, Brian was friendly. Brian was he knew his job and what he had to do. And yeah, he's very clumsy, he's very awkward, he's not a great speaker. He's, but this is his church. And again, he's old. So, he would get up there and just say crazy stuff, but you'd be like, he's old. Like, he's not from here. Like, and nobody's like particularly looking forward to when Brian comes, but it's also like so much deference and so much respect in this honor culture, and okay, Brian Houston, maybe he's not the greatest speaker, but we got to give him something because this church is good. Look at this church, and he did this, and he picked this guy, and he's so okay. His gift isn't speaking, but he's the leadership guy. He's the idea man. And yeah, again, he's only here once a year. We can put up with him for, whatever.
Right.
He's grandpa. Of course, grandpa's going to say some silly things, but he earned it.
Right. So. Yeah.
And he did handpick, like he handpicked Carl, but he also, like, I guess from the documentary, for me, it's news. Probably for you guys, maybe not, but like, to realize Laura Lentz was such a close, like she was like a daughter to the Houstons kind of a thing. Like that couple looked set up from the start. Like,
yeah, which, listen, Laura's not going to listen, but if she does, I do not care for Laura Lentz. Like, and it's nothing, initially it was nothing personal because there's nothing to be personal about because Laura Lentz, to me, blank, non-factor. She's just there contributing nothing, but not particularly doing anything harmfully. Like, she's just there, whatever. But for me, I mean, I have a lot of empathy for Laura. Like, I do not envy her. I do not envy her life or any of this. But I'm like, Carl is a schemer. He is strategic. And would he have been interested in Laura Lentz if it weren't for the closeness with that family?
Right.
To me, that's a question.
That is a question on how that, I mean, I think there was a conversation, I forget if it was Bobby Houston or somebody else, maybe it was even her parents, talking about, yes, Carl had confessed to her mom about some of the bad things he had done, or like, he'd done some crazy stuff, or even his issues or with girls or who knows what. And he regretted after saying it because it ended up being Laura's mom. But like, yeah, you wonder like how that all came to be, because you looked at her and she was like the good Christian girl, and then he was doing the stuff on the side, and then all of a sudden it just came out of nowhere, and then boom, the whole story, it just kind of went to, I also can't speak to like the whole thing because I don't know them, but I can speak to wanting so badly to believe in a changed person. I think the part that broke my heart was her saying that Carl has changed. And I hear that from a lot of people who watched the documentary about, like what you quoted, Nate. It's so nice by episode 4 to see Carl contrite. And I have a reaction. I feel for Laura if she's taken by that. I understand what it is to convince myself of that kind of a thing. In my 20-year marriage, I remember doing the exact same thing. So I'm not coming from a place of I'm so much better. It's my heart breaks at like the wanting so badly to hang on to this thought of what you were investing in and had built, that even if it's the other evidence so far I love the expression of like, doubt someone's words, even doubt someone's actions, but believe and trust in the patterns. Like, I think that's a fantastic way to have discernment, because, what someone says, you can say anything, and actions can be strategic. You can pick when you're going to be good to your wife and when you're going to, in front of whom, and like, how you act behind the scenes versus, depending on what you want and the trajectory you're aiming for. Like, Carl had strategies. He did certain things on purpose. The crying on cue is a great example of that. I actually don't see Brian do any of the crying on cue. So I think he's missing some of that charisma, even in the ability to like turn on the waterworks. Carl could just do that, really like get people's heart, sucked into it. So I felt for her in that moment. But I feel like Laura, in some sense, reminds me of the people who are very nostalgic about Hillsong still after everything that's gone down and who still buy into it. I feel like, that desire for a redemption arc just is so strong in that certain group of people, that even if the patterns are communicating a very different message, it's like, no, Carl was contrite and remorseful at didn't we all catch that message? It's obvious that, and I think you said it to me, Nate, behind the scenes, like you'd have to talk to the people, or maybe it was one of our friends online, the people who've had experience with Carl. They're the ones who will see through that sort of a thing and have a very different take on when they're watching him talk, Yeah.
I do want to read that comment then. One of our very good friends commented on our post on Facebook and wrote, the way the producers of this documentary clearly got played by an expert bullshitter illustrates why giving, quote unquote, both sides equal footing when dealing with an abusive manipulator will fail every time. In critical thinking terms, it's a fallacy to give a known liar and their victims the same level of credibility. What they should have done was believe the victims and center their stories, and include survivors in the editing process for any footage they include of Carl, because those with experience with his brand of gaslighting, who've learned to recognize it, are better equipped to refute his bullshit. Outsiders will fall for it almost every time. Even professionals who are trained in abuse dynamics, more often than not, fall for the abuser's narrative because gaslighting is extremely effective.
Yeah. I mean, I remember you saying, Nate, that the scene they cut away to Carl where he looks at the camera and he goes, "Look at these tears. Is it fake?" And he points to his eyeball.
So real quick, that was Janice, you probably remember this back in 2014 or 2015. Nightline did a special on Hillsong NYC. And I remember it was right around the time I first started attending. So it must have been 2014. And I was standing in line and the camera showed up and they started, doing the whole like man on the street interview type thing. What draws you to this place or whatever. And that special aired on ABC. And Carl did the whole,
you can't fake who you are. You are who you are. So if everybody on our...
Who are you?
I love people.
Tell me what's up.
I really want to have, the same heart for people that Jesus did.
And then after a moment, he turns and he looks at the camera and, he's got the tears falling down his eyes and he goes,
"Don't show this, Byron. This is fake. It's all for show."
It's wild that I look back on that, having just been forced to resign from a church by an executive pastor who could do that, who could cry on cue. And he had cried in my office when he,
when he made you resign,
when he made me
acted
resign.
like he was so sorry about you leaving.
Yeah. And I remember feeling so uncomfortable by that moment, but it didn't click. It didn't click for me that this was calculated, that this was, and maybe he didn't consciously do that, but it's like a mechanism that he uses in order to deflect from what he's doing, and make the emotion about something else, right? I remember that old pastor of mine up on stage without fail every time he preached, every sermon, at some point during the sermon he would start crying. And it became a running joke amongst a couple of the staff members, like, "Steve's preaching, get ready for the waterworks."
And it's not an uncommon thing. I've seen white men do this it seems to be a thing. For me, it sends up like when people say cancel culture, it sends up a red flag for me. When I see a white guy start turning on waterworks in his sermon, there's a piece of me that gets very skeptical because I've seen how that gets used and how it gets played out and the manipulation aspect of it. I've seen it so many times that it's like, oh, like if I didn't know the person now, I'd just be like, oh, I kind of feel like I know you. I've seen you before. But you were saying that he was different. Carl was not your old pastor. You had seen that happen before, but you got taken by it initially when he did the whole, "Does this look fake?" The first time you saw it, you were like, oh, he's sincere. He cares. And now it's harder where you're sitting now because you've seen it play out and you have a different opinion.
Yeah. Tears are disarming, which is why I think they're often used as a weapon by narcissists and manipulators. Yeah. So the documentary, though.
He did it a few times throughout that documentary. Like that was Dateline footage that they flashed back to. But then throughout the documentary at many different points, he turned on the waterworks.
Janice, what was that? What was going through your mind when you saw him being interviewed and the stuff he was saying?
Well, which episodes?
Oh, right.
Yeah, again, for the first two, it looked like, oh, they're doing this juxtaposition. And I was like, oh, in some ways, this will be the closest I ever get to a confrontation with him on some of this stuff. And I don't know, like thinking about it now. So like I haven't seen any, I was like, I have properly curated my feed and I haven't seen any pro Lentz anything. Nobody in my timeline is selling that. And yeah, so many of my followers and the people who are commenting are people who see through it. So I don't And, believe it or not, I don't go looking for trouble. I don't go into other people's things. So like at this point, me with evangelicalism, I'm like, they can have it. I actually don't care what they think. I expected that. Like the people who were going to be pro Lentz and pro marriage and he's contrite, they were going to be that anyway. Yeah. So like, doesn't even matter. So even like, should we be giving liars equal time? I'm like, it's not even about that it was equal. I'm fine with them being interviewed if you're actually going to push back, if you're actually going to ask follow-up questions. Like, what happened with the queer community, what happened with race, it happened. There's nothing we can do about that now. But to have him just sit there unchallenged, like, this is how you treated queer. Like, they didn't even ask him. They didn't ask him anything about the treatment of queer people. Like, that was my commentary. Like, no, that's what you kind of get with Christianity, whatever. But they didn't ask him anything about that. And even with, the race stuff, and again, that's when I'm like, well, were they trying to make him look bad, or did they think that was fine? And did they think that was a good answer? With him, no, I think that we did better. That was one of the things we did best on, so watching that, I'm like, well, none of this is new. I'm sure you can hear my story on probably on this podcast, but definitely on other ones where like, that's literally the last words to me. You're not going to find anywhere else. We're doing better at this than anyone else. You're not going to find what you're looking for. Like, so I'm like, he has nothing about his scripting, his line has changed. Like, so none of this is surprising to me. Right. This is exactly what he's been saying the whole time. So what is disturbing and what makes this not a good idea is that you aren't pushing back on any of this. Right. Like, you're just letting him talk. And it's not that, again, I'm fine with him talking, but like, this is supposed to be your job. Like, you're, when I email you and you email me back and say, no, we're just trying to do something fair and balanced. It's not, then ask him fair and balanced questions. Exactly. Like, I'm fine with you talking to him. But again, we're not trying to be part of his redemption arc. So if you are going to do this, good. Yeah. If you're going to hold his feet to the fire, we'll thank you for it at the end to be like, oh, we didn't, we were nervous about it, but you did that. So it's just letting him stick to his script. And also, that could also be fine if you are just showing him for what he is. Right. Again, the problem comes in episode 4 when now you have just taken everything that he has said and now we're redeeming him. And now, he's paid for what he's done, and all that really matters is his marriage, and, everything is fine now.
Which was the thing you had brought up on your social media, even prior to this coming out, that, like, at the end of the day, the whole point of all of this, right? The infidelity in his marriage was the spark, but that's not ultimately what our concern with Carl Lentz was about. Whatever happens between him, his wife, and the supermodel he had an affair with, that's their business. None of us give a shit. What we cared about was how he was treating the people and the culture that he created in his church, the things that he needs to answer for. Look, and I get it, right? Evangelical culture is going to be all up in arms over infidelity in marriage because they're so pro-marriage. And look, we're not anti-marriage here. We're just...
they're not pro-healthy marriage. They're pro-staying together no matter what. They're pro-institution, but not the people in a marriage.
And that's not even true either, because they're pro-white man redemption. And that's it. Because we would still be here, still having this same conversation if Laura had left him. And then his story would just be, I made a mistake, and now I'm trying to be a better man. And I couldn't make my marriage work, but... that's on me, and I've learned that lesson. And he would have just as much support. Like, it's not about marriage. It's just about we cannot have a bad white man. We just cannot.
Right.
So however this goes, him being contrite and him saying he messed my bad on that, that's it.
Right.
That's fine, because white men must be forgiven.
Yeah.
They have to.
That is something important to take note of how much effort gets put into redeeming Carl. Like, I'm thinking of Black Hillsong pastors who have fallen from grace, and I don't see anyone trying to put them back into positions of power. I'm not hearing that story going on, but white men in positions of power, there's always that redemption narrative. I liked what you were saying, Janice, or I'm thinking through, I listened to your podcast episode, I guess, before it came out, and we were, you could kind of taken a break for a bit from your God Is Not Given, and you came back and right before it dropped. And so you're kind of speculating, going into it. And you had mentioned like, yeah, I expect evangelicals are going to, want a redemption arc. And you kind of said what you were saying here about, just not being surprised if evangelicals want to eat up or would redeem Carl. Mm-hmm. But you're kind of like, this organization, this secular group has no investment in evangelical culture. There is no reason to prop them up. So I think there was a hopefulness there of that possibly they would take a more hard-hitting direction. And then you guys both mentioned like challenging them with asking the real questions. I'm wondering, what are the questions that you wished they would have asked instead because they didn't do it? What needed to be pushed back on, do you think? What would you wish that you could just grab the mic and be like, all right, Carl, so?
I mean, honestly, a follow-up to anything. And it's so hard to say because I'm also sitting here with knowledge that not everybody has, like having read the investigative report. And so it's like you just know too much. So even I understand why people feel empathy for Laura Lentz. But then I know this was not Carl's first affair. This is not the first time. This is so I know as soon as they start talking and they start laying out this version of events, they're lying. They're lying and they're selling a story that is not real. Is the infidelity real? Yeah. Do women get hurt over infidelity? Yeah. Has Laura Lentz been hurt over infidelity? Yeah. Was it in October of 2020? No. No. Was she gobsmacked by this? Maybe this instance, but oh, my wife, a flawless character, and I would never want her. What? My guy? Oh, okay. So we're just pretending. And maybe the director doesn't know to ask this follow-up question, but then, director, you've done a bad job because this investigative report is out there. And if you haven't gotten a hold of that, what have you guys been doing this whole time?
And it's not like people haven't been talking about it. You don't have to scratch that far beneath the surface to find out there's a report about the culture that Carl Lentz created at Hillsong NYC that even Hillsong's lawyers who conducted the investigation said, you all have a problem on your hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to dig that far to find that. So I don't know what this production team was doing, where they were looking. Look, even the Discovery Plus documentary that basically handled this whole story with kid gloves, even their follow-up 6 months later or 9 months later episode, they talked about that. And I think they had a podcast series where they went into that report.
That's actually where I heard the details of that report. More of them was from that podcast on.
Right. Yeah. And Noemi's podcast talks about it.
So the information is out there. And if you are good journalists, you should have had this. So even if we're going to pretend like you guys don't know, and that's when I'm wary of the whole thing. Cause I'm like, they're lying and you're letting them lie. You know that they're lying. And even if you don't, we don't know that he had affairs before. Okay. But that report said she punched her 2 to 3 times, and it said it was in a different location, and all these other mitigating circumstances, they are only admitting to the things that people already know. If that punching incident wasn't in that report and people didn't already know about it, they wouldn't have said anything about it.
Yep.
So they're only admitting to things that people already know. They're giving the simplest, cleanest, most, pro them versions of the story, and nobody is pushing back on anything. So to ask, like, what would you have wanted them to ask? I would have wanted them to ask anything. But once they didn't, then I'm like, oh no, this isn't for real.
Yeah.
And now I feel stupid for being a part of this. I feel mad because I've been here before, and that's fine, and I'm gonna rip this apart on social media, and I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. But you got people who hadn't told their story before, who wrestled with this, who have been torn up and anxious about this coming into it. You got them, you took their stories, sidelined them, took them out, and then betrayed them. This was a betrayal. And for me, like, knowing, some people got involved in this or felt comfortable with it because I was involved, because I said yes, because I vouched for this. So now you've made me complicit in something again.
Yeah. All of what you said. I will say, not that you are the type of person that feels like this kind of care, but you do care about people, and you do care about what you're leading people into. But your response to all of this, the way that you've handled yourself on social media, look, as part of the reason why I responded to the producer's email was because I knew that you had been involved, right? I trust you, and I trusted you then, and I still trust you now. And a lot of that is because you always respond well after the fact, because you couldn't have known. None of us knew. None of us knew going in, because the things that we were sold.
That's not how it was presented.
Yeah, it's not how it was presented. And back then, it was probably a different project than how it ended up.
Yeah, they probably didn't have Carl Lentz at the time, so probably maybe would have been a victim story if they couldn't get. And who knows? Maybe if they got enough victim story, they used that to leverage against Carl. Like, okay, here's a direction we could go. We have this much testimony from this much people, or you could also decide to come in and say your piece.
I think, and this is my theory of what happened behind the scenes. Obviously, everybody wanted to talk to Carl Lentz, and we're playing word games, right? No, I was not paid for my participation in this. I didn't, whatever. Yes, nobody wrote a check out to Carl Lentz that said to Carl Lentz for appearing in this documentary. However, I'm sure he probably has a production company, a shell company, or whatever, was paid through that, and was probably just paid licensing, right? We got all these photos and all these footage and stuff we haven't seen of the Lentz family before. So, like, there's ways to pay people for their appearance and say it's not for your appearance. So Carl and Laura need money. They need the attention. And I think
they need the sympathy after everything that went down.
I don't even think they care about that. I think they did it for the money and just to get out there. And I also think that the production company hooked this big fish and gave up too much power. Like, I'm sure that the Lentzes, whatever it was in their contract, I think they just got hamstringed. Like, I think they got played. I think they signed them up, made a deal with the devil, just made too many allowances. Because I don't think, I want to believe, the director is not a shitty person, that when it came down to it, that her hands were just tied and she wasn't allowed to push back on them. Couldn't ask follow-up questions. Like, just really had to stick with whatever their stipulations were. And then what do you do with that? Like, This is all you have. And this is all they're going to sign off on, and you've paid however much to get them here, and this is your big fish now. So this is their project now.
Yeah.
This is Michelle from Tulsa, Oklahoma. You're listening to Full Mutuality.
Are you an alumnus of an evangelical college or university? Or have you ever wondered what attending or working at one of those schools is like? The Chapel Probation Podcast brings you the stories from students, faculty, and administration who experienced all the racism, the queerphobia, the misogyny, and purity culture weirdness that are kind of the hallmarks of these schools. I'm Scott Okamoto, author of Asian American Apostate, Losing Religion and Finding Myself at an Evangelical University, which tells my story of teaching English at an evangelical school and realizing I didn't believe in God or the Bible anymore. I created Chapel Probation as a complement to my book, but this podcast has become its own community of people who have stories of hurt and pain and stories of triumph during and after their time at evangelical schools. Some of the guests you've probably heard of, but most of them you probably haven't. But all the stories are incredible examples of surviving Christian schools and finding ourselves. You can find Chapel Probation wherever you listen to podcasts, and I hope you'll join us.
Carl should be like, as the lead pastor of Hillsong NYC and somebody who's traveling around the world speaking at random churches, and the amount that Hillsong charges for their honorariums, how on earth is Laura not a stay-at-home mom? What is she doing?
What is she doing?
Because the other thing too is, okay, the other stuff aside,
she's reading the magazines on how to know your guy's cheating on you.
Yeah.
It's a lot of so many books.
But we never saw her. She was also our pastor, supposedly as equally as Carl was, but we never saw her.
But she didn't know that the church was more than just a building back then. Now she does.
Yeah. But like, that's another thing that bothers me. There's this whole story about, Carl sleeping with the nanny and then her punching the nanny, and then you have a nanny.
It's a nanny, and also the nanny
is a pastor. She's married to another pastor.
Tiffany watching her kids so she could watch Carl's kids.
It just occurred to me earlier this week talking to someone. I'm like, oh, blah, blah, whatever. But I'm like, wait a minute. Tiff came back and went to Boston. They lived in freaking Boston. Tiff is watching your kids in Boston and you are in New Jersey? What? Like, it's not like you all just lived in the same, like, you are literally a state,
two states away, and she 3 states away, and she uprooted her life in New York to go nanny somebody. She uprooted her life in Boston to serve for a church in Boston for a pastor who was living in New Jersey.
Imagine her husband is just like, yes, go do this. And after finding out all that went down.
Even if Leona is just, an innocent little dove, just I don't know anything that's happening. If Carl is doing this and he's a pastor, aren't you wondering what Josh is doing? Like, if you think this is okay, if this is how pastors operate, you can't help but have a dysfunctional marriage because you're either assuming, I guess that's what Josh is doing too. Good luck, Tiff.
Right, exactly. Now you've got Tiff working there. The other thing too that like, so you have this then all sorts of questions about Josh now, because if there's no way that given the breadth of what Leona wrote on Medium, there's no way that conversation wasn't had prior to that post going up. Why is Josh still working for Hillsong at this point?
His wife is a sacrificial lamb. Does he really care what she's doing behind closed doors as long as he keeps his position for being quiet? The guy knows the script. He knows what he's supposed to do. He doesn't care. These people are, they're not about...
That's why it's so hard to talk about it, because it's like, I know too much. I know Leona was miserable and cried when, they were told they had to go to Boston.
Yeah.
I know Leona didn't want kids at all and definitely didn't want the second one. So yeah, she doesn't want to be at home.
Right.
Like, I know the Lentzes can't have an outsider as their nanny because they're doing all kinds of stuff. Like, they are not good people, and they can't have some regular person who still looks up to them and would be shocked, or who would sell the story, to whoever. Like, these are dysfunctional people doing dysfunctional things all the time.
Yeah.
I think the sexual abuse thing that upset me about the whole thing and with him bringing it up is that this idea that hurt people, like they're dysfunctional people, yes, but a lot of people who have been harmed don't go doing, like this cannot be, sexual abuse survivor cannot be your card for harming other people and saying, this happened in my past, cue tears. And now, like, anything that I did to anyone that we've just talked about is explained away. Because guess what? I didn't rape anyone. I didn't do that to anyone. And a third of women are sexually assaulted, and we can't use that card to harm people. Like, why does he get a... Yeah. That's the part, when he started telling his sexual assault story, the part of me that was just like, it feels like this is being used to justify and excuse and explain away. Like, that's what it feels like it's serving. Because... there are people who've gone through being harmed as a kid and like, how is Brian Houston now the bad guy and you're the victim? Because Brian was brought up by a pedophile dad. And like they say, Carl was planted in rotten soil. That line got thrown out there. So was Brian planted in rotten soil. Anyone can use that as, if we're going to look at the statistics, anyone can use that card of I was damaged from someone else. That's why I went, and therefore I'm off the hook. But for some reason, Brian is the villain in this documentary. Carl is, he's a
but even again, like no follow-up, no pushback on anything. So then when he's talking about, I go to therapy now, right? So, and the therapist is like, yeah, okay, pray out there, but no, we're going to come in here and deal with the real issues. Well, let's talk about, what do you believe about therapy and prayer? What does that say for all the people? There are a lot of people in your church who could use therapy. How are you helping them? What do you say to the people who need mental health assistance now because of the experience in your church? And you can't pretend like, oh no, I had this issue and this issue and this is why this was happening and this was this and I was a bad person, blah, blah, blah. You can't pretend like I was only unhealthy in my marriage, but I was killing it at church. Like... that was going great, and it's just my marriage that suffered. Like, we're here on this documentary because we were talking about these things long before your marriage fell apart. Like, again, none of us cared about that. So, but no questions about what about the people you left behind? Laura, you're sitting here crying tears because my pastors, they abandoned me. They turned on me. Yeah, we
think about that. And the people who are more than a building now that you know
surprise. We've been out here, you since 2017, me since 2017, a lot of people since 2020, 2021, 2022 when the Discovery Plus documentary hit. We've all been out here. We all experienced it. It's not news to us. When that news dropped about Carl, sure, you and I left around the same time. So it would have been another 3 years before the news about Carl dropped. But it's not like you and I looked at that and said, oh, that's shocking. Like, neither of us were shocked by it. Sure, we were like running through all of the things in our minds and like justifying some stuff and thinking through our interactions with him. And yeah, there were certain facets about the story that made us pause, but I think a lot of it is attributable to the kind of culture that exists in Hillsong. I don't know if you felt this way. I think you might have voiced this at one point. I know I felt this way, but there was a part of me that thought, this feels very convenient. Like Carl and Brian were at odds, and
it was not about the affair because there's been affairs before. Like, and there have been affairs before. There are affairs happening now. There will be affairs.
Yeah.
And as long as you are useful to the brand, they will cover it up.
Yep.
And keep you covered.
Yep.
Somebody sent me a link to someone giving their testimony about Redemption Church and about the cover-ups of abuse that have happened. This girl was telling her story, and she was
Redemption Church or Transformation Church, the new one.
Transformation Church, yeah, the one Carl has gone to. They have a history of. Someone was telling their story of how the pastor at that church currently handled her scenario and what they did, and it's his buddies that are in the leadership that were doing the harm. And now he has Carl come in, and I'm just like, oh shoot! Like, of course,
yeah, birds of a feather.
Like, it's all dirty.
Yeah.
Because again, why are you guys hiring this man? Like, even if you believe, no, he was a good soul and whatever, he did nothing to stand up to this corrupt system.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And that's apparently what you're looking for.
Right.
That's
Like,
what
and
you're
again,
looking
because
for.
he has said nothing, he just alludes to all these things. Yeah, cheating on my wife, but you get married too young and blah, blah, blah. So let's have a conversation about purity culture.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible for people to get married too young? What happened there? What do you think people should do? But we can't say any of that because you need to make a living in this world and you're going back to it. And you all have to pretend the same thing so you can all keep doing the same thing and keep abusing people and covering for each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nate brought up the other documentary, at least went to Wave Church and showed what the crappy teachings he was teaching. He acts a bit of like an outsider to what was going on in this documentary. Like he was kind of being pulled and the stuff was swirling around him, but not that he was an active participant in the harmful stuff. But then you look at like the teachings, like if he wants to go on about how he got married too young, what was he teaching about purity culture in his?
Yeah, what was he doing at Wave Church?
How was he handling people who were,
Yeah. The thing that drove me nuts, Carl's direct victims were never given a voice in here. And people who were victimized by the system that he perpetuated, their stories about what Carl had done were distanced from Carl's direct influence. So he isn't implicated in any of this. The only thing that he's implicated in this documentary is in his affair with the model. That's
because Carl's only victim was Laura Lentz.
Yeah, that's how it feels like in this.
So she did get
thing.
to speak. We heard from her.
Yeah. But like, at least, with the Discovery Plus documentary, they went and they talked to people at Wave Church who were, who had been victimized by Carl and his teachings,
But I think someone left a comment and they're like, oh, the next documentary, like God is not given, should produce the next documentary.
I think I saw that comment.
And I'm like, no, I think we're done with documentary. Like, I think, and it's a tricky, you can't just say anything in a documentary and like, whatever, it's a lot of work.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I think we all have our platforms and like, I can't wait to write some more sketches, write a short film about this, like tell the story, tell the truth, but put humor on it.
Mm-hmm.
Put, something that they can't refute. It's not about you.
Right.
This is just a story. Like, all the documentaries put together, they add up to something good, something useful.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are just other platforms and other ways, and we just cannot count on power to check itself.
Yeah.
At any level. Like, I thought we'd be safe with the seculars, but they got bamboozled.
Yep.
Hey everyone, I'm Jessica from the Leaving the Village podcast. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for tuning into this show. We're so grateful that you've decided to spend your time with us. Seriously, Dan, Gail, Kathleen, Nate, Scott, and the rest of us here at the Dauntless Media Collective couldn't produce content like the show you're listening to without your support. I'd also like to invite you even further into the conversation. Right now, there are some great discussions happening over in the Dauntless Media Collective Discord server. If you're interested in chatting with other folks who are deconstructing and decolonizing the oppressive traditions they came from, please feel free to hop onto the server. If you don't know what Discord is, it's a place where communities can gather online for chatting on a wide variety of topics. In our Discord server, we have channels devoted to general deconstruction conversations, some meme sharing, therapeutic venting about whatever religious bullshit you're currently dealing with, and even a channel specifically devoted to talking about the latest episode of the podcast you're listening to right now. I hope you'll join us. You can log in directly to the Dauntless server by clicking on the link in the show notes or heading to dauntless.fm and clicking on the link in the top banner. See you there.
You wrote a really powerful open letter to the director. I think we'll throw that into our show notes for people who want to read it. We recommend people go check that out. But I wanted to just flip back to something you said, Nate, about how, you trust Janice even after this. I know you feel a sense of responsibility, Janice, but I just want to echo Nate. Like, yeah, he trusts you for a reason. Even after the fact, we all get played at different times by people. Trusting people, that happens. And, how you respond when you see that people have been sidelined, when you see how things go down, you're not afraid to acknowledge, oh, I was wrong. Oh, I actually am not happy how this turned out. No, this is not what I signed up for. And that makes a difference too. I'm not sure where I heard you say it, or like I've been reading your Instagrams too, but somewhere, maybe it was in the open letter, maybe it was somewhere else, but you mentioned like, this is the start of the survivors telling their stories, and looking for the positives in this. If people who do want to know and maybe watch the documentary and want to look up the names or find out more can, and they could listen to the stories that are not told. They can take the time to dig into the different people who started. You started down a path. I'm sure you said a lot more that wasn't included. I mean, I've heard so many of the different stories, the lengthier versions and how they've been cut up through that. And I know you can find them. You can find them online. And I think that is probably one of the pluses, is just giving attention to this so that people who do care can take the time to dig, can take the time to learn from it. Do not expect, the documentary to be the end all be all of the learning. It is sensational. It is marketed for the masses, and it's an incomplete story. And take the time to listen to the actual people who were there. I think, sorry, I have to say this, the most aggravating line from the documentary that really got me ticked off was and I don't know why, like, I can't even imagine why they did this. Like, trying to imagine them sitting around and throwing the different pieces they want to cut and edit together. And they just cut to this guy who's like, I think Carl Lentz has more than paid for what he's done. Or something like, did I say that right? I think Carl has, no, I wrote it down. I think Carl has paid for what he did. That's the exact words. I did write it down. And I'm just like, wait, this dude was not at Hillsong, New York. He didn't get affected by anything Carl did. Nothing impacted his life. But he's going to get on now after we've watched Carl give his speech and heard and now he's going to tell us, like, literally feed us a conclusion that we're supposed to come to about who Carl is and what he's gone through and how we're supposed to feel about it. And I just found that, like, don't tell the people who lived out Hillsong, New York, that he's paid how? Paid through what? Is it just paid because his marriage suffered? Like, again, like you said, we don't care. Your marriage is your own business. But, like, what has he done to pay? You brought this up, Janice. He talked the line where he said, the only people that matter are these, was he say these five? Was it his 3 kids and his wife? No, these 4 people, right?
These are the people that matter, yeah. Mm-hmm. These 4. And it's literally just his family, his kids and his wife. That's it. And like, and I've seen you guys putting this up with the picture of your group, including those who've been cut out, who were interviewed. And it said, the people we care about. And it's you guys, it's the survivors. It's the ones who were bumped out for Carl. But like, yeah, like what has he done to pay for the wrongs he has done against the people who suffered at Hillsong? Not his wife, we're not talking about those things. We don't care. But how has he paid with regards to making amends with, like, have you guys heard do you have any friends at Hillsong who have a lovely story to tell that, like, the news doesn't know about how he has paid for harm done to them specific? Like, does anyone have these stories?
That's kind of the beauty of this whole thing. Like, again, it's been good for me to, like, realize just how much I do not care about the evangelical world anymore. Like, again, y'all were going to believe him anyway. This documentary is frustrating. Not because I don't think it helped him. I don't think it helped them. Again, the people who were going to die on that hill were going to die on that hill anyway. I don't think outsiders, like just regular, secular people, they didn't come off. The lenses didn't come off looking good. Like, if anything, like this documentary was extremely boring. Like, who cares about some random person's marriage? And if we're sticking with their story, 2 affairs in a 6-month period, like, who cares? Who cares? So to the outside world, this is not a draw. Like there's nothing here. And then to ex-evangelical, like people see through him. Like there's nobody ex-evangelical. There's no ex-Hillsonger who was already annoyed with Carl again, not because of his marriage, because of this, and this. None of them are like, oh, now I understand. And I'm so happy his marriage is fine. Like, I think it wasn't
good to see him come around in episode 4.
Yeah. Like, I think ultimately, I think the documentary had no effect. It didn't change anyone's mind. Like, it just strengthened everyone's position.
Yeah.
So whatever you came in thinking, whatever team you were on, you stayed on that team.
Yeah.
Like, and there may be some people who were pro Lentz and were like, actually, I don't know. They're not looking that great.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, that like looking back on that last episode and how that all wrapped up, it makes the documentary look stupid more than anything else. Because if it's impossible for me to put myself into the shoes of an outsider. But I'll make an attempt. If I'm sitting here watching this documentary as an outsider and I see all of these things happen and I see these people telling their stories, this guy, Carl, because there's all this footage of Carl getting up and preaching. He's got crowds of thousands of people. There's footage of him like walking the streets, hanging out with Justin Bieber. Clearly, he's an influential guy. He's got a lot of power in this circle. So then he's done things, and there are these people that are telling their stories who, let's say I've been in a church and I've been, part of a church as this outsider. And I know that, okay, the pastor is a powerful person. They have a lot of influence. They kind of control the ins and outs of the church. So that must be Carl's role at this church. Therefore, these people who are telling their stories and talking about a culture that was run by this guy. Why is none of that being talked about? Now I want to know. And if I'm like one of those documentary junkies, then I'm like Googling and I'm searching and I'm finding all the podcasts like ours, like yours. Okay. But seriously though, I think you're right. I think this doesn't really help the Lentzes. I think they just wanted an opportunity. Carl specifically wanted an opportunity to get his face back out there, to climb the ladder, maybe to make it more palatable, his new job at Transformation Church. And if people see some kind of redemption story, maybe.
But like even that, like I'd be so fascinated to find out the timing of everything. Because in the documentary, he's pretending to have this day job.
In that beautiful leopard print.
What the hell?
Low V-neck.
So he's pretending he's returned to the real world and advertising, I've been selling the gospel, blah blah blah, whatever. And now he's back in evangelical world, and like this is not going to be helpful for them. Like this is just going to bring up more questions about who is this guy. And
he looked like fucking Joe Exotic from Tiger King. Sorry.
Yeah. So he's this ridiculous person.
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, the only way, even like, it's annoying that they painted this, about his marriage, because that makes, if you're going to buy their storyline and we're all butthurt over, he cheated on his wife, and that was just distressing to me. So we all look like idiots.
Right,
so, my God, look at these bunch of dum-dums. And I'm fine with that. He's not going to look better than us. So then we just all look dumb to outsiders, and that's fine. That's fine. But I don't I'm like, it's a rough, awful triumph for us, but in a way it is, because I'm like, we all look better than Carl Lentz. Mm-hmm. We all look healthier, happier. The only way he might look like a victim is just like, all these people seem to be doing well, right? And we've left evangelicalism, and it hasn't been easy, and our lives aren't perfect, but we left it and we're fine without it. Carl Lentz has had to crawl back to it. Carl Lentz could not make it in the real world. So like they can put up their facade, they can do whatever, but you've had to go back to that world. You couldn't make it out here. And that's part of the reason why they can't push you on anything. They can't ask you, how do you really feel about the queer community?
Right.
Because that's not going to work for that world.
Mm-mm.
You're not even, oh, we're going to say Brian is bad, blah, 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 whatever. But we're not investigating the system. Like, even if you're going to pretend it was all Brian and he, whatever, like, I don't know, it's like his narcissism just won't even allow him. Because I'm like, you had it out. You could have said, you know what? They're right. I did not do good on the race thing, but it wasn't my fault. I wanted to, but Brian wouldn't let me.
Right.
You could have put all that on him, but you couldn't even do that. You said, no, I think we did great. So what do you think you didn't do good at Hillsong?
Right.
You have not acknowledged anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you've gone back to that world. And again, this is going to be awkward for you, Transformation Church, because what is this guy doing? He's not in ministry. He's a
consultant.
He's a consultant. We're talking to him about strategy. Are you trying to end your church? What is he strategizing?
Like he said in the documentary, I'm good at advertising because I've been advertising the gospel for quite a while. That was his pitch on what he does. And I was just like, is this the kind of gospel that people like? This is really what you want to pitch him as his strength? And what you said about
none of this is going to age well for him.
No.
This was bad. This was propaganda, and it was bad propaganda. Again, it is only going to work on the people it was going to work on anyway. No one did a good job here. So this is just going to make this. It's not going to age well. We're going to look back on this when he falls again, because he will. Even the whole thing with, that was on me and the power dynamics. I acknowledge the power dynamics were off, but this was a consensual affair.
He literally said it wasn't abuse. I deny that it was abuse.
So even in that, that's why I'm like, you're.
So how are you taking responsibility? He said, I take responsibility. It
but
wasn't
you're not.
abuse.
And then that says to me, because what is the worst case scenario? You're trying to sell this as you are Mr. Contrite and I'm sorry and whatever. So what does it harm you to say, I thought it was consensual. I realize now that the power dynamics were off. I didn't mean to be abusive, but it was. And things like this should not happen. But you can't say that. Number one, because you're going to do it again. And you want to leave that door open for it to be okay. Number two, people who have done it, are doing it right now, and will continue to do it, who you want to work with, who you want to stay in ministry circles with.
Yes.
And you cannot compromise that. So that's the biggest disappointment to me, I think, with this whole thing.
Yeah.
This was supposed to be this survivor narrative. And even if you didn't want to personally attack Carl Lentz, you didn't even make him interrogate the system. You didn't hold his feet to the fire for anything. So you didn't look at the undertow. You didn't, because a follow-up question, well, if the power dynamics are off, how is that not abuse? Isn't that abusive? Shouldn't that not happen?
Right.
You say you take responsibility. How?
Right.
What does that look like in your situation?
But he can't do that because he needs this world and he has to go back into it, and they don't want to change it.
Right.
So even there's just no interrogation.
Right. Now the question then becomes of the crew and why they didn't, and even if they didn't want to ask him the question, if they didn't want to follow up on that,
I think they couldn't.
What? But why not bring in... See, this is the other thing that bugged me. You want to talk about how this was for the survivors, right? Supposedly, it was billed to us as this is going to be the story of the Hillsong survivors. I remember that conversation on the phone. This is going to be the survivor story. So where are the survivor advocates. At least in the Discovery Plus documentary,
they had,
you had Boz
Mike
Chividjian.
freaking Cosper,
right?
From the guy who defended Mark Driscoll through the
and
whole
not because he likes
podcast.
Mark Driscoll, because he likes the system.
Right,
this could
because
not.
he's doing the same things.
He talked about the similarities with his own church. Even this one dropping clues on how common it is, and it's like, dude, you ran the same system as this. Of course, you don't want to dismantle it.
They don't want it to change. Even that part where they touched on NDAs for like a second, and then Carl is like pretending like he's, downing. And then he says, I guess, what did he say? Is this, I guess it's standard for churches now? Something whatever. I'm like, are you kidding me? Your dad is a church lawyer. Your dad has been setting this is standard.
Right.
They have made this system. Your father has participated.
That's another thing, too, that I think, again, just speaks to the fact that this was the Lentz show, because even the Discovery Plus documentary talked about the fact that Lentz's dad was the one that was helping write those contracts to create those LLCs in the U.S. that allowed Hillsong to move money around the way they did when they opened up shop here in this country.
But I love your point, though, Janice, about how, he doesn't say, he says things in a way that he distances himself, like with the NBA stuff. Oh, I don't know. I guess that's just standard practice. But he did that with so many topics where people can read into it whatever they want. He could have said, the way the queer community was handled by Hillsong, I wished I could have pushed back on it more. He could have said, I don't agree with that stance. But like you said, he's still that's all he has is the evangelical world. He's in a church that's not going to allow him to be like, I support queer people. So he can't say that. So he literally talks out of both sides of his mouth. He goes, people in evangelical communities, they come in and assume it's this. And then, but it's like that everywhere. He basically says this is kind of how it goes, but he doesn't say it's bad. He doesn't say I disagree with it. He leaves. He has a way of talking.
Opinion on anything.
Yes. Yep. So if you want to think he's distancing himself from it, he says it in a tone that can be interpreted that way, but he never directly says it's problematic. He avoids saying the stuff where he would say he actually takes an issue with it because he can't do that. Otherwise, he'll close doors on him in the world that he's in.
We don't make blanket statements. We have conversations.
Oh,
it's a case-by-case basis.
It's a conversation. Oh, my goodness. I
mean, what's wild to me is the fact that I look back on a lot of what had gone down between Brian and Carl while I was still there, and how so much of this like vague non-stances on things kind of was perpetuated by Carl. Because Brian Houston was very willing to say, we affirm the biblical stance that marriage is between a man and a woman. Carl was the one who said, we want to have conversations. We'll take it on a case-by-case basis.
Boomer versus younger evangelical who's a little more sly at knowing how to get the gay people, use their talents, exploit them and then shut them out whenever it's no longer convenient because people now know.
So we watch this thing and we imagine that Carl has changed because that's what he wants us to imagine. But he's like has been sort of the theme of this part of the conversation. He speaks out of both sides of his mouth.
He really
constantly.
has a talent to talk both ways at the same time.
He doesn't, though. He doesn't. They didn't push back on him. Like all of this could be cleared up with a simple question that was not asked. So it's not. It's not. He's not he's not slick. He's just not being asked the questions.
You're right. He's not good at it.
He's being provided the opportunity to stay as
he's being coddled. He's being taken care of.
Yeah.
Because there's no way. There's no way for him to skate out of it if they had just said, what is yours? Where do you stand? Because you don't have to have a conversation now. It doesn't have to be a blanket statement. I'm not asking you about Hillsong's stance. I'm asking you about yours.
Right.
What do you believe?
Right.
That would have been a hard-hitting question. I wanted to quickly bring up, Laura had made some statements in there at the end. We know we brought it up before, but at the end of the whole thing, she said something like, there's more to church than just a building. And I see that now. I was just a little stunned by a statement like that you realized just now after being out. And she said she talked about how she needed to be out of it to see it. That all the time she was inside Hillsong, she didn't realize that church is more than just a building, because she says, I see that now. Church is, I'm like, how do you be a pastor's wife and be in this church and doing all these things, and you have no concept that church is more than just a building till now? Like you said, they're not slick in the sense that some of the things that they, and how it makes them look is just, it's awful. Like, it's stuff that, like,
they're awful people.
No one who's in that role should ever think that way about the people.
But that's why I'm saying, like it's, I hated it. But then, like, in the long run, I'm like, no, it's not great it's better for us than it is for them.
Yeah.
Because people are going to come out and they're going to look at them. They're going to look at us. We're clear on who we are, what we believe, what we know, what we don't know. Here's what I thought. Here's what I think today. Oh my goodness, 3 weeks from now, I changed my mind, and here's what I think now. And we have that freedom to say that. Their world is dying. They are losing people. They're not, their team is not getting bigger. Like, more people are coming in our direction. So they are used to having the money, having the power, having the attention, and having people just accept their vague statements and their half beliefs and their, whatever. But, like, that's not enticing. Like, nobody watched this and said, oh my goodness, I got to get into a church. Right. Like, I've never thought about Jesus before, but man, they make it look like I got to get over there. Like, nobody's saying that.
No.
If anything, people are like, ooh, yeah, I was right to stay away. And wow, okay, no, I grew up in this. Here's a bunch of people who also grew up in it. And here's a bunch of people who left. Let me go see what these people are talking about. So it was not what it was supposed to be. But in the end, I'm like, the truth is on our side. Time is on our side. The ultimate charisma is on our side. Like, it's just not, it's annoying because I'm like, oh, this is just like America. Like, you guys just set this T-ball up for him.
Right.
You set this up for him to win. You just made it so easy for him.
They did, but not me. I didn't set them up for a win.
You never set people up.
You never set them up for a win, Nate. That's when you deal the whole time. They set them up for a win. They still whiffed it. But, like, it's annoying that y'all made us come and sit here and be part of this. Like, you didn't need us. You didn't need us for this. You did not need us for this. And but now you regret it.
Yeah.
I promise you. You wish you hadn't to come after me. Like, you wish, oh my God, we should have left her out. Because
yeah, because none of us would really be talking if we hadn't have sat in those rooms.
Right.
We wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation right now. We would be having a conversation because that was our church. But we wouldn't be having this conversation if they hadn't have reached out to us and said, hey, we want to hear what you have to say about the church that you were a part of. Right.
Or even, like, if you're going to bring on Carl Lentz, say that up front.
Yeah.
Be honest about that, and then let us decide. Like, I think, like, at the last minute, I don't even remember. It might have been on camera, but it might not have been. Like, I think the director was like, oh, like, if you could say anything to Carl Lentz, like, what would it be? And I think it was just like, how dare you? But it's like, you could have, if you were serious about this, you could have given us time. And you didn't have to say, oh, we got Carl Lentz on board. But you could have said, hey, think about it for a few weeks. And if we were by chance able to get Carl Lentz, what do you think would be some good questions? What would you want? What would you want to ask? Like, involve the people who would have the questions. Because maybe you legitimately don't know what you say. I don't know how you don't know. Like, you spent all this time talking to all these people. I don't know. But, like, you could have just made this easier on yourself. Yeah. But you made the same mistake that they made. And just thinking, oh, no, we have the power here. What are these people going to do? Like, it's just a different time. You have the platform. Yes, you have millions of viewers. But social media is going to social media. And we're out here. And we get to talk back. And yeah, not as many people are going to hear us as saw that. But our audience, the people who are looking for this, they're going to find us.
Yeah, exactly. Whew, it's an ongoing conversation. If you haven't seen it already, the documentary is called The Secrets of Hillsong. It's on Hulu in the U.S., distributed by FX in conjunction with Vanity Fair, the magazine. Go check it out, knowing what you know after hearing what we have to say. I will say, I don't necessarily recommend the documentary in general, but I do recommend that you check it out to kind of see what this was all about. And know that, episodes 1, 2, and 3 were just fine. And maybe the first half hour of episode 4.
I think Carl didn't start his narrative till halfway through the last
I think it was
episode,
towards the end of that was when we started to see what looked like somebody who works for Transformation Church was putting together a little highlight reel of the Lentz family. But yeah, anyway, so real quick, let's transition to give a plug. Janice, you as of the time we're recording this, you released a brand new book. You already have a book out that is fantastic. It's in a completely different genre. But
Scandoozle the musical.
Scandoozle the musical.
Yeah, you said it right. Yeah. I can't say it properly, but you got to meet Shonda Rhimes through that. So freaking cool. I think the longest show I've ever committed to watching was Grey's Anatomy. I didn't end up getting into Scandalous, but still, Shonda Rhimes, I have lots of respect, and I'm amazed that you got to meet her. And yeah, I'm just fangirling because that's pretty cool. And then from there, you have a new book out. Would you like to tell the people what it is?
Yeah, so it's called Grift of God, and it is an evangelical game book. So it's got some Mad Libs in there. We've got the game. When I was a kid, used to play this game, MASH. It was Mansion, Apartment, Shack, House. Yep. And you just all these different categories, and you go through and you see what your life is going to be. There's like who you're going to marry, how many kids you're going to have, whatever. So I was like, let's do the evangelical version. So it's cash. So it's like you're planting a church. And this is a prophecy of how it's going to go. So it's like, is it going to be in a club, an arena, a school, or a house?
Just to help grifters? Is that what you're trying to help them?
I love it.
And yeah, so it's, I don't know. It's, you speak the language and you hear these things for so long. It's like, no, you can fill in these blanks and you can, do whatever. So the big idea behind it is, no, you can plant a church and you can run a successful service by using this book. So, yeah.
Don't help the bad guys, Janice. Nate and I have often said that if we were evil people, we could easily become like superstar megachurch pastors because we would know how to say all the terrible, just you learn the scripts and if you want it, and it's an audience that's just so ripe for just shed a few tears, talk about forgiveness and grace when you get in trouble, and it works. I mean, the grift goes on with so many people over and over, and yeah. So, are you trying to help them out? Giving them the scripts.
Little does anyone realize the three of us are going to start a church.
Mm-hmm. We're going to be the next evangelical crew of mega church.
It's so fun to joke about, but I couldn't. Ooh. We're too decent.
We are. That's the problem.
Because if you think Carl Lentz believes in anything,
no way.
You sweet summer child.
Seriously, I do have to laugh. I know I bring it up often, but John Fermini, with his whole the house established, if there isn't a parody church that belongs on the Righteous Gemstones, it's in real life in Hawaii. John Fermini gives up a lucrative career in, I don't remember if he was in real estate or banking, and he's like, no, there's more money in this. Mm-hmm. So he goes and he starts a church in Hawaii called The House Established and puts up the acronym THE, the. And the T in the
stands for
the.
So you went to a church called Liquid, and it was living water for a thirsty world.
Yep.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. If we were to start a bad grifting megachurch, what should we call it? What kind of lame name would we give to our? We What could we be?
Well, there's one page in the book, and it's not like, I just have these different little tips and tricks for planting a church. And one of them was like, oh, if you're trying to name your church, like think about what you want. I think it says, imagine you're in a restaurant 5 years from now and you're leaving a track as a tip for the waitress, and you hear someone say, oh, he pastors that church. Like, what do you want your people to be known for? Like, that's the pastor of the church of the people who blank God. And so it's like you're looking for a verb or an adjective, and just, the thesaurus. And it's
so
either
is probably not in it, but
that's not there. That's too advanced.
It's at a whole other level.
So yeah, you're just looking for a good verb. It's like, what do you want your church to be known for?
I like the idea of an acronym for a church name. So I was sitting here going, you know what? I could imagine an evangelical megachurch pastor saying, let's repurpose woke, and then come up with an acronym for woke,
worshiping only.
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't know.
Worshiping only keeps everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, we did it.
We got it.
The woke
all right, guys.
Church.
Woke Church with pastors Nate, Janice, and Gail.
Oh man, terrible stuff.
It's starting here now. I see the church name that I would have wanted for a mega church has already been taken by another podcast called Mega. I would have just been like, my church is called Mega. Mega church. Janice, this has been a whole lot of fun. We'll go ahead and put your stuff in the show notes. The podcasts that Janice works on are God Has Not Given and Bad Words. So go check them out. They are a blast. Janice, thank you as always. It's always a whole lot of fun. We love having you hang out with us.
Anytime. See you for the next doc.
Yeah, the next documentary. That'll probably be the next time I see you face to face. Somebody else is. No. We hang out because we're not that far from each other. But yeah, that is entirely a joke. The next time we see each other will not be for another documentary.
So then every time we do hang out, it's mega, because we are making everything God always.
Mega together.
Oh God. All right. This has been fun.
That wraps up another episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. And if you don't already have one, head over to our website, fullmutuality.com, for a list of all the apps you can find us on.
We couldn't do this without you, our listeners, so thank you so much for your continued support. Speaking of support, one of the best things you can do for us is to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review.
I'm pretty sure 5-star reviews get you an extra crown in heaven.
But seriously, if you found this episode insightful, spread the word and share it with your friends.
And don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Full Mutuality. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast.